Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Detective Ray Morrison had always prided himself on being a man of principle. At 54, with 28 years on the force, he commanded respect in the small town of Millbrook. His daughter, Linda, had married well, or so he thought. Tom Brennan, her husband of 18 years, was a successful construction contractor who'd built half the new developments in town. Tom was quiet, methodical, and had never given Ray any trouble. Until now. The call came on a Tuesday evening. Ray's grandson, Kyle, had been pulled over for speeding. Nothing unusual there. 16-year-old boys and fast cars were a dangerous combination. But when Ray arrived at the scene, something felt wrong. His partner, Officer Danny Walsh, was acting nervous, sweating despite the cool October air. "What's the story?" Ray asked, approaching Kyle's beat-up Honda Civic. "Kid was doing 45 in a 30, Danny said, not meeting Ray's eyes. "But Ray, we found something." Ray's stomach dropped as Danny led him to the passenger side of the car. There, plain as day, was a small baggie of what looked like marijuana tucked under the seat. "That's not mine," Kyle protested, tears streaming down his face. "Grandpa, you have to believe me." Ray studied his grandson's face. The boy was scared, genuinely terrified. But the evidence was there. In a town where Ray's reputation mattered, appearances were everything. Tom arrived 20 minutes later, his work boots still covered in concrete dust. Ray watched as his son-in-law's face went from confusion to cold fury in the span of seconds. "This is ridiculous," Tom said, his voice deadly calm. "Kyle doesn't do drugs." "The evidence says otherwise," Danny interjected, earning a sharp look from Tom. Ray found himself in an impossible position. His grandson, his daughter's family, his own reputation, all hanging in the balance. The decision he made in that moment would change everything. "I'm sorry, Tom," Ray said, his voice heavy, "but we have to follow protocol." As they handcuffed Kyle and loaded him into the patrol car, Ray caught something in Tom's expression. It wasn't defeat or resignation. It was the look of a man taking notes, memorizing faces, calculating odds. Ray had seen that look before, in the eyes of criminals who were already planning their next move. Chapter 2. Lines Drawn. The Brennan household had never felt colder. Linda paced the living room, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, stress etched across her face. She'd been crying on and off since the call came in about Kyle's arrest. "We need to support Dad," she said for the third time in an hour. "He's just doing his job." Tom sat in his leather recliner, outwardly calm, but internally seething. He'd built this house with his own hands, every board and nail placed with precision. Now it felt like a trap. "Your father planted that bag, Linda." The words hung in the air like smoke from fire. Linda stopped pacing, her face going white. "How dare you?" she whispered. "My father is a good man. He's dedicated his life to this community. Your father is a dirty cop who just destroyed our son's future to teach me a lesson." Linda's hand cracked across Tom's face with surprising force. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. "Don't you ever speak about my father that way again," she hissed. "Kyle was probably buying drugs from some dealer and got caught. Dad saved him from something worse." Tom touched his cheek, feeling the sting, but his expression never changed. "So that's how it's going to be." "That's how it's always been, Tom. Family first." The irony wasn't lost on him. Family first, except when it came to the family he'd built with her. Later that night, after Linda had gone to bed, Tom made a series of phone calls. The first was to Marcus Riley, his lawyer and old college roommate. The second was to a private investigator named Janet Cross. The third was to a number he'd hoped never to use again. "Vincent, it's Tom Brennan. I need a favor." Vincent Castellano's gravelly voice carried decades of cigarettes and harder living. "Tommy boy, been a long time. What's eating you? Someone hurt my kid. I need information. Information costs extra these days. Money's not a problem." There was a pause. "Must be serious if you're calling me. Text me the details. I'll be in touch." As Tom ended the call, he didn't notice Linda standing in the hallway, having heard enough to know that her husband was planning something that would tear their family apart. Chapter 3. The Architect's Blueprint. The next morning brought an uncomfortable family meeting at Ray Morrison's house. Linda's mother, Carol, bustled around the kitchen making coffee while Linda's younger brother, Mike, sat at the dining table looking uncomfortable. Mike was a firefighter, 32 years old, with the same strong jaw as his father but softer eyes. "This is all going to blow over," Carol said, her voice artificially bright. "Kids make mistakes. Kyle will learn from this." Tom sat across from Ray, studying the man who'd raised the woman he'd loved for 18 years. Ray was still handsome at 54, silver-haired and broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that commanded rooms. But Tom was looking deeper now, seeing things he'd missed before. "The question is," Ray said, "how do we handle this as a family?" "By telling the truth," Tom replied evenly. "The truth is that your son was caught with illegal substances," Ray shot back. "I could have looked the other way, but that wouldn't have been right." "Dad's right," Linda said, reaching across to squeeze her father's hand. "We can't enable Kyle's behavior." Mike shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should focus on getting him help instead of assigning blame." Tom almost smiled. Mike was the only one in the room with any sense, which made what was coming even more tragic. "Kyle's already talking to a counselor," Tom said. "Court appointed, but he maintains his innocence." "Of course he does," Ray scoffed. "They all do." That afternoon, Tom received his first package from Vincent. It contained surveillance photos, financial records, and a detailed timeline of Ray Morrison's activities over the past 6 months. What Tom found buried in those records made him lean back in his office chair and whistle low. Detective Ray Morrison wasn't just a dirty cop. He was an entrepreneur. The marijuana planted in Kyle's car had come from evidence lockup, part of a larger operation where confiscated drugs were being resold through a network of dealers. Ray wasn't the mastermind, but he was a key player. But that wasn't the interesting part. The interesting part was who Ray's primary partner was in the operation, Danny Walsh, the nervous officer who discovered the drugs in Kyle's car. Tom smiled for the first time in days. He was an architect by training, someone who understood that every building needed a solid foundation before you could construct the walls. Ray Morrison had just given him the perfect foundation for his revenge. The second package from Vincent arrived that evening. This one contained something even more valuable, a recording device small enough to fit inside a pen and detailed instructions on how to use it. Linda found Tom in his study, surrounded by papers and photos. "What are you working on?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Just some project estimates," Tom lied smoothly. "The Patterson development is moving faster than expected." She moved closer, and Tom casually covered the photos with a blueprint. But Linda had seen enough. "Those look like pictures of my father." Tom looked up at his wife, the woman he'd shared his bed and his dreams with for 18 years, and felt something die inside his chest. "They were pictures of the courthouse," he said, "for the new municipal complex bid." Linda nodded, but Tom could see the doubt in her eyes. She didn't believe him, which meant she'd already chosen her side. That night, as Linda slept beside him, Tom stared at the ceiling and made his final decision. He'd try to build a life based on trust and love, but those foundations had proven faulty. It was time to build something else entirely, something permanent. Chapter 4. Gathering Storms. The preliminary hearing for Kyle's case was scheduled for the following Monday. Tom spent the weekend preparing, but not in the way his family expected. While Linda thought he was meeting with their lawyer, Tom was actually sitting in Vincent Castellano's warehouse office on the wrong side of town. Vincent looked exactly like someone who'd spent 40 years walking the line between legal and illegal. Scarred hands, gray stubble, and eyes that had seen too much. His warehouse was officially an auto parts distributor, but everyone knew Vincent dealt in information, favors, and occasionally harder services. "Your boy's clean," Vincent said, sliding a thick folder across the desk. "Model student, no priors, doesn't even drink. Meanwhile, your father-in-law's been supplementing his pension for the past 2 years." Tom opened the folder and found photographs, bank statements, and phone records. Ray Morrison and Danny Walsh had been skimming from evidence lockup and selling confiscated drugs back to dealers. The operation was small but profitable, about $50,000 over 2 years. Why frame Kyle? Tom asked. Near as I can tell, your boy was just convenient. Morrison needed to show his partner he was serious about maintaining cover. Planting evidence on a relative sends a message. Nobody's above suspicion. Tom studied a photograph of Ray counting money in what looked like a storage unit. How solid is this evidence? Solid enough to end careers and start prison sentences. But here's the thing, Tommy. Your wife's been asking questions about you too. That stopped Tom cold. What kind of questions? She hired a PI 3 days ago. Wants to know where you've been spending your time, who you've been talking to. Woman's preparing for war. Tom leaned back in his chair, feeling the pieces of his life rearranging themselves. Linda wasn't just defending her father. She was actively working against her own husband. There's more, Vincent continued. Your brother-in-law, Mike? He's been meeting with Linda and your father-in-law. Looks like the whole family's circling the wagons. Mike's a good guy, Tom said, though doubt was creeping in. Good guys sometimes do bad things when family pressure gets applied. From what I can see, they're planning to present a united front at the hearing. Your son's going to get thrown under the bus, and you're going to be painted as a delusional father who can't accept his kid's guilt. Tom stood up, his mind already working through contingencies. I need more than evidence of the drug dealing. I need insurance. Vincent grinned, showing teeth stained by decades of coffee and cigarettes. Now you're talking my language. What kind of insurance? The kind that makes people think twice before they betray family. That evening, Tom returned home to find Linda hosting a family dinner. Ray, Carol, and Mike were all there, along with Kyle, who looked miserable and defeated. The conversation stopped when Tom walked in. We were just discussing Kyle's future, Linda said, her voice artificially sweet. Tom looked at his son, saw the hopelessness in the boy's eyes, and felt his resolve harden. And what did you decide? Kyle's going to plead guilty to possession, Ray said firmly. With my recommendation, he'll get community service and probation. Clean slate after a year. No, Tom said simply. The room went silent. Even Carol stopped serving dinner. Excuse me. Ray's voice had an edge to it. Kyle's innocent. He's not pleading guilty to anything. Mike cleared his throat. Tom, maybe it's better to just put this behind us. Fighting it will only make things worse. Tom looked at his brother-in-law, someone he'd considered a friend for over a decade. Whose side are you on, Mike? I'm on the family's side. So, am I, Tom replied. The question is, which family? Linda stood up abruptly. Kyle, go to your room. Mom, I didn't. Now. After Kyle left, the real conversation began. You're being unreasonable, Carol said. Ray is trying to help. Ray is trying to cover his ass, Tom shot back. Ray stood up, his hand instinctively moving toward where his service weapon would normally be. I think you should be very careful about what you say next, Tom. Tom smiled, and something in that smile made everyone in the room shift uncomfortably. Are you threatening me, Ray? In my own house. The tension was broken by Linda's voice, cold and final. If you can't support this family's decision, maybe you should leave. Tom looked around the table at faces that had once been welcoming, now closed and hostile. Vincent had been right. They'd already chosen sides. I'll pack a bag, Tom said quietly. As he headed upstairs, he heard Linda's voice behind him. You have until Monday to come to your senses. Tom paused on the stairs, not turning around. Monday's the hearing. I'll see you in court. Chapter 5. The Perfect Storm. Tom checked into the Millbrook Inn, a small hotel downtown that catered to business travelers and people going through divorces. The irony wasn't lost on him. From his room, he could see the courthouse where Kyle's fate would be decided in 3 days. His phone rang constantly. Linda trying to negotiate, Mike attempting to mediate, even Carol calling to appeal to his Christian sense of forgiveness. Tom let them all go to voicemail. Vincent arrived Sunday evening with the final pieces of Tom's plan. Your father-in-law's been busy, Vincent said, spreading new photographs across the hotel room's small table. He met with the prosecutor yesterday. Looks like they're not just railroading your kid. They're planning to charge him as an adult. Tom's hands clenched into fists. On what grounds? Possession with intent to distribute. They're claiming the amount found was too large for personal use. That's impossible. The bag was tiny. Vincent's smile was grim. Funny thing about evidence lockers, things have a way of growing. My source says the bag that'll appear in court tomorrow will be considerably larger than the one they showed you Tuesday night. Tom stared out the window at the courthouse, his mind racing. They weren't just covering up Ray's corruption. They were actively destroying Kyle to do it. Here's what you asked for, Vincent said, sliding a small device across the table. Digital recorder, voice-activated, 8-hour battery life. Completely undetectable once it's in place. And the other thing? Vincent handed him a manila envelope. Birth certificate, social security records, medical files. Your wife's been busy over the years. More secrets than a politician. Tom opened the envelope and found documentation that made him sit down hard on the hotel bed. Linda hadn't just been hiding things from him. She'd been lying about fundamental aspects of their life together. How long have you known? Vincent asked. I suspected something was off about 5 years ago. But this... Tom held up a birth certificate that showed Kyle wasn't his biological son. The dates didn't lie. Linda had been pregnant before they met, not after. The father, Danny Walsh, your father-in-law's partner. Tom laughed, but there was no humor in it. So Kyle is actually Ray's grandson through Danny, not me. That's why they're so eager to protect the family name. And why they're willing to destroy the kid to protect themselves. If this comes out, it exposes both the affair and the drug operation. Tom stood up and walked to the window. Below, the courthouse looked peaceful in the evening light. Tomorrow, it would become a battleground. Vincent, I need you to do something for me. Name it. I want you to be in that courtroom tomorrow. And I want you to record everything. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. Tom dressed in his best suit, navy blue, conservative, the kind of outfit that suggested respectability and quiet confidence. He ate breakfast alone in the hotel restaurant, watching the local news report on the troubled teenager from a prominent construction family. The courthouse was already busy when Tom arrived. Marcus Riley, his lawyer, met him at the steps. Tom, we need to talk, Marcus said urgently. The prosecution just filed amended charges. They're claiming Kyle had enough marijuana for distribution. I know, Tom said calmly. How could you? Never mind. The point is, this changes everything. We're not talking about simple possession anymore. This can mean real jail time. Tom looked at his oldest friend, someone he'd trusted for 20 years. Marcus, whose side are you on? What do you mean? I mean, are you working for me? Or did someone get to you too? Marcus's face went pale. Tom, you're being paranoid. Nobody got to me. Then why didn't you fight the amended charges? Why are you pushing me to accept a plea deal that ruins my son's life? Marcus looked around nervously. Because sometimes you have to accept reality. Tom nodded slowly. You're right. Sometimes you do. Inside the courthouse, Tom saw his family gathered in the gallery. Linda sat with her parents, Mike beside them, all presenting a united front. They looked like they were attending a funeral, which in a way they were. Kyle sat at the defendant's table, looking small and lost in his oversized suit. When he saw Tom, the boy's face lit up with hope and relief. Dad, you came. Of course I came, Tom said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. The word son felt different now, but the love remained the same. Biology didn't determine family, loyalty did. As the judge entered the courtroom, Tom caught Vincent's eye. The man was sitting in the back row, dressed like any other court observer, his equipment hidden and ready. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Hawkins. Tom stood, feeling the weight of the manila envelope in his jacket pocket. In a few minutes, everyone in this room would understand the true meaning of family loyalty and betrayal. Chapter 6. The Reckoning begins. Judge Hawkins was a stern woman in her 60s, known for running an efficient courtroom and having little patience for theatrics. She'd been on the bench for 15 years and had seen every kind of case Millbrook could produce. We're here for the arraignment of Kyle Brennan, she announced. What does the defendant plead? Marcus started to stand, but Tom placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Your Honor, before we enter a plea, I'd like to present evidence that's relevant to this case. Judge Hawkins frowned. Mr. Brennan, this is an arraignment, not a trial. Evidence presentation comes later. Your Honor, this evidence directly relates to the integrity of the charges being filed. I believe it's relevant to the court's consideration of bail and plea arrangements. From the prosecution table, District Attorney Robert Shun looked annoyed. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defense is clearly stalling. Tom stood up. Your Honor, I'm not the defense attorney. I'm the defendant's father, and I have information that this court needs to see. The murmur from the gallery was immediate. Linda half rose from her seat, her face a mask of confusion and growing alarm. Judge Hawkins considered for a moment. Mr. Brennan, you have 5 minutes to present whatever evidence you think is relevant. But this better not be a waste of the court's time. Tom reached into his jacket and pulled out the manila envelope. But instead of opening it immediately, he turned to face the gallery. Your Honor, before I present this evidence, I need to ask Detective Ray Morrison to stand. Ray's face went white, but he stood slowly, his police dress uniform immaculate. Detective Morrison, you were the responding officer who discovered the alleged marijuana in my son's vehicle, correct? I was on scene, yes, Ray said carefully, and you can swear under oath that the evidence was not planted. D.A. Chin stood up. Objection. Mr. Brennan is not qualified to conduct an examination. Sustained, Judge Hawkins said. Mr. Brennan, get to your point. Tom opened the envelope and pulled out a series of photographs. Your Honor, these photographs show Detective Morrison and Officer Danny Walsh engaged in what appears to be the sale of confiscated drugs from the evidence locker. The courtroom erupted. Ray sat down hard, his face ashen. Linda was on her feet, shouting something Tom couldn't hear over the general chaos. Judge Hawkins was banging her gavel for order. Furthermore, Tom continued, his voice cutting through the noise, I have bank records showing that Detective Morrison has received over $50,000 in unexplained deposits over the past 2 years. D.A. Chun was frantically conferring with his assistants. Ray Morrison looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Your Honor, Tom said, I submit that these charges against my son are part of a cover-up designed to protect a corrupt police officer who needed to demonstrate his legitimacy by sacrificing an innocent boy. Judge Hawkins had restored order, but barely. Mr. Brennan, these are very serious allegations. Do you have proof to back them up? Tom handed the envelope to the bailiff. Everything's in there, Your Honor. Financial records, surveillance photographs, and witness statements. Your Honor, D.A. Chun said desperately, we request an immediate recess to examine this alleged evidence. Granted, we'll reconvene in 2 hours. As the courtroom began to empty, Tom felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Ray Morrison, his face a mixture of rage and desperation. You son of a bitch, Ray hissed. You have no idea what you just done. Tom looked at the man who'd raised his wife, who'd been a grandfather to Kyle, who'd thrown them all away to protect his own interests. I know exactly what I've done, Tom said quietly. I've started telling the truth. Ray leaned closer. This isn't over. You're right, Tom replied. It's just beginning. As Ray walked away, Tom noticed Linda approaching. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes held something he'd never seen before, pure hatred. How could you do this to my family? She whispered. Tom looked at the woman he'd loved for 18 years, the mother of the boy he'd raised as his own son, and felt the last of his old life die. I didn't do anything to your family, Linda. Your family did it to themselves. She raised her hand as if to slap him again, but stopped when she saw his expression. Something in Tom's eyes warned her that this time, he might not just stand there and take it. This marriage is over, she said. Yes, Tom agreed. It is. As Linda walked away, Tom turned to Kyle, who'd been watching the entire exchange with wide eyes. Dad, what's happening? Tom put his arm around the boy's shoulders. We're going home, son. Your real home. For the first time in a week, Kyle smiled. Chapter 7, Unraveling. The 2-hour recess turned into an all-day investigation. By 5 o'clock, Ray Morrison and Danny Walsh were in custody, and D.A. Chun was in Judge Hawkins' chambers explaining how his office had failed to properly vet the evidence in Kyle's case. Tom sat in the courthouse cafeteria with Kyle and Marcus, watching the news coverage on the small television mounted in the corner. The scandal was already making statewide news, small-town police corruption exposed by desperate father. How long have you been planning this? Marcus asked quietly. Since the moment Linda slapped me for telling the truth about her father, Tom replied. Kyle looked confused. But Dad, how did you know Grandpa was dirty? Tom studied his son's face. Kyle still didn't know about Danny Walsh being his biological father, and Tom wasn't sure he ever needed to. Some truths were more destructive than helpful. Sometimes you have to dig to find the truth, Tom said. And sometimes the truth finds you. Vincent Castellano appeared at their table like a well-dressed ghost. Mind if I sit? Marcus tensed. Tom, who is this guy? A friend, Tom said simply. Vincent sat down and placed a small digital recorder on the table. Thought you'd want to hear this. He pressed play, and Linda's voice filled the small space around their table. We need to make sure Tom looks unstable, she was saying. If we can show he's having some kind of breakdown, it'll discredit whatever evidence he thinks he has. Ray's voice came next. Danny's already talked to the prosecutor. They're willing to amend the charges to adult felony levels if Tom doesn't back down. What about Kyle? That was Mike's voice. Kyle's expendable, Ray said coldly. Better to sacrifice one kid than lose everything. The recording continued for another 10 minutes, documenting a conversation that had taken place just that morning in the courthouse parking lot. Tom listened to his wife and her family plot against him and Kyle with a detachment that surprised him. Jesus, Tom, Marcus whispered. They were going to destroy you both. Kyle's face had gone pale. Mom really said that? That I was expendable? Tom reached over and squeezed his son's hand. Your mother chose her side, Kyle. Now we know where we stand. Vincent turned off the recorder. There's more if you want it. Your brother-in-law, Mike, wasn't entirely on board with the plan, but he wasn't willing to stand up to his father either. What about the drug charges against Kyle? Marcus asked. Dropped, Vincent said with satisfaction, along with about 6 other cases that Ray Morrison was involved in over the past year. DA's office is in full damage control mode. Tom stood up. Kyle, we're going home. To the hotel. No, to our real home. The Brennan house looked different as they pulled into the driveway. Linda's car was gone, and so was most of the furniture from the front room. Tom wasn't surprised. She was probably at her parents' house, regrouping and planning her next move. They walked through the house together, taking inventory. Linda had been busy during the day's court proceedings. She'd taken her clothes, jewelry, and several pieces of furniture that had belonged to her grandmother. But she'd also taken things that weren't hers: Kyle's computer, Tom's tools, even the photo albums that contained Kyle's baby pictures. She took everything, Kyle said sadly. She took things, Tom corrected. There's a difference. That evening, as Kyle did homework at the kitchen table and tried to pretend everything was normal, Tom sat in his study planning the next phase of his campaign. Vincent had provided him with enough evidence to destroy Ray Morrison's career and send him to prison. But that was just the beginning. His phone rang. Linda's number. Hello, Linda. We need to talk. Her voice was carefully controlled, but Tom could hear the strain underneath. I'm listening. Meet me at Morrison's diner. 1 hour. Come alone. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, you'll never see Kyle again. The line went dead. Tom stared at the phone, feeling a familiar cold anger settle in his chest. Linda had just made her biggest mistake yet. He called Vincent. I need backup, Tom said. What kind of backup? The kind that makes sure I walk out of Morrison's diner in one piece. On my way. As Tom got ready to leave, Kyle looked up from his homework. Where are you going, Dad? To end this, Tom said. Once and for all. Chapter 8, The Final Gambit. Morrison's Diner sat on the edge of town, a classic American eatery that had been serving truckers and locals for 40 years. At 8 o'clock on a Monday night, it was nearly empty except for a few regulars at the counter and Linda Brennan sitting alone in a back booth. Tom entered through the front door, while Vincent and 2 of his associates positioned themselves outside. Through the windows, Tom could see them taking up strategic positions around the building. Linda looked up as he approached. She'd been crying, but her makeup was perfect and her posture was straight. Even in crisis, she maintained appearances. Sit down, she said. Tom remained standing. You said something about Kyle. I did. Linda's voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly as she reached for her coffee cup. He's not your son, Tom. Not biologically. I know. That stopped her cold. You know, Danny Walsh is his father. You were 3 months pregnant when we met, not 3 months after we got married. Linda's facade cracked slightly. How long have you known? Suspected for years. Confirmed yesterday. Tom slid into the booth across from her. The question is, why tell me now? Because I want you to understand what's at stake here. Kyle belongs with his real family. Tom almost laughed. His real family? You mean the drug-dealing cops who just tried to frame him for felony possession? My father made mistakes. Your father is a criminal who is willing to sacrifice his own grandson to save his own skin. Linda leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Danny wants to be part of Kyle's life. He wants to claim his son. Danny's in jail. He'll make bail. And when he does, he's going to file for custody. Tom studied his wife's face, looking for tells. She was lying about something, but he couldn't pinpoint what. Even if that were true, Tom said, Kyle's 16. He's old enough to choose where he wants to live. Not if his legal father is declared unfit. The threat was clear. Linda and her family were planning to attack Tom's fitness as a parent, probably claiming mental instability or worse. Let me guess, Tom said. I'm having a breakdown? Paranoid delusions? Making wild accusations against respected police officers. Linda's silence was answer enough. Tom reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, the recorder Vincent had given him. You should know that everything you've said in the last 5 minutes has been recorded. Linda's face went white. You're wearing a wire? I'm protecting myself from a family of criminals and liars. Tom, please. Here's what's going to happen, Tom said, cutting her off. You're going to call Danny Walsh and tell him that any attempt to claim paternity or file for custody will result in me releasing certain information to the media. What information? Tom smiled coldly. The information about how Kyle isn't just Danny's son. He's also Ray's grandson through his daughter's affair with his partner. The same partner who's been helping Ray sell confiscated drugs for 2 years. Linda's face crumbled. You bastard. I'm not finished. You're also going to sign divorce papers granting me full custody of Kyle and waiving any claim to alimony or property settlement. I'll never. Or I release the recordings of your family planning to frame an innocent boy for felony drug possession. Linda stared at him for a long moment. I don't recognize you anymore. Good, Tom said, standing up. The man you married was too trusting. He believed in family loyalty and keeping his mouth shut when people he loved did terrible things. That man is gone. What if I refuse? Tom looked down at the woman he'd once planned to grow old with. Then you'll find out just how ruthless I can be when someone threatens my son. As he walked toward the door, Linda called after him. This isn't over. Tom paused without turning around. Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet. Outside, Vincent was waiting by Tom's truck. How'd it go? She's going to fight. Expected that. You ready for the next phase? Tom looked back at the diner, where Linda was still sitting in the booth, probably calling her father or her lawyer or both. What's the next phase? Vincent grinned. The phase where we stop playing defense and start playing offense. Chapter 9. Ashes and New Foundations. 3 months later, Tom stood in the ruins of the Morrison family empire and felt something approaching satisfaction. Ray Morrison had been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for drug trafficking and corruption. Danny Walsh got 3 years for his role in the operation. The Millbrook Police Department was under federal oversight, and half the force had been replaced. Linda had fought the divorce for exactly 6 weeks before Vincent's second phase of evidence convinced her that surrender was her only option. The recordings of her family's conspiracy were damaging, but the financial records showing her knowledge of her father's criminal activities were devastating. She'd signed the papers granting Tom full custody of Kyle and walked away with nothing but her car and her clothes. Kyle was thriving. The boy had started seeing a therapist to deal with the trauma of his arrest and the revelation of his family's betrayal, but he was resilient. His grades had improved, and he'd made the varsity baseball team. More importantly, he'd stopped looking over his shoulder, stopped waiting for the next betrayal. Tom's construction business had actually benefited from scandal. Being the man who'd exposed police corruption and save his son had given him a certain cachet in the community. New contracts were coming in faster than he could handle them. The only casualty Tom occasionally regretted was Mike Morrison. Linda's brother had tried to stay neutral in the family war, but neutrality was a luxury Tom could no longer afford. When Mike had refused to testify against his father, Tom had made sure that Mike's fire department learned about his brother-in-law's prior knowledge of Ray's activities. Mike had been forced to resign and had left town quietly, probably to start over somewhere else. Tom felt bad about that for approximately 10 minutes. Then he remembered Mike sitting at his dinner table, listening to plans to destroy Kyle, and saying nothing. Family loyalty was a fine thing, but it had to run both ways. On a Tuesday evening in January, Tom and Kyle were working together in the garage, rebuilding the engine of Kyle's Honda. The boy had grown 3 inches since the trial and was finally looking his father in the eye when they talked. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Shoot. Do you ever miss Mom?" Tom considered the question while cleaning a carburetor. "I miss the woman I thought she was. But that woman probably never existed." "Do you think she misses us?" "I think she misses the life we had. But she made her choice." Kyle nodded, accepting this the way he'd learned to accept most hard truths. "Vincent called today. Said Danny Walsh is getting out next month." Tom's hands stilled on the engine part. "Is he planning to cause trouble?" "Vincent doesn't think so. Apparently Danny's got a job lined up in Colorado. Wants to disappear and start over. Smart man." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of tools and quiet classic rock filling the garage. Finally, Kyle spoke again. "I know about Danny being my biological father." Tom looked up. "How long have you known?" "Since the trial. I heard Linda talking to her lawyer." Kyle shrugged. "Doesn't change anything. You're still my dad." Tom smiled, feeling something warm settle in his chest. "Damn right I am. And if anyone tries to take me away from you again..." Tom's smile turned cold. "They'll learn why that's a bad idea." Later that evening, after Kyle had gone to bed, Tom sat in his study reviewing the final reports from Vincent's investigation. Every loose end had been tied up, every enemy neutralized or neutralized. Ray Morrison would die in prison. Danny Walsh would disappear into obscurity. Linda had remarried within 2 months, a middle manager from the next town over who had no idea what kind of woman he'd taken on. Tom's phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello. Mr. Brennan? This is Agent Sarah Chun with the FBI. I wonder if we could speak." Tom's blood chilled. "About what?" "We're investigating some irregularities in the evidence against the Morrison police corruption case. Some of our forensic accountants have questions about how certain financial records were obtained." Tom was quiet for a long moment. "Are you asking if I broke any laws to expose criminals?" "I'm asking if you'd be willing to meet with us to discuss your methodology." Tom thought about Ray Morrison in his federal cell, about Danny Walsh planning his escape to Colorado, about Linda starting her new life with a man who would probably be as naive as Tom had once been. "Agent Chun, I think you'll find that everything I did was in defense of my family. And I'd do it all again." "That's what I was afraid you'd say. Are you planning to arrest me?" "That depends on what we find." "Mr. Brennan, some of the methods used in your investigation suggest professional assistance." Tom smiled. "Agent Chun, I'm a construction contractor who built half this town with his own hands. When someone tries to destroy my family, I build something to stop them. And if we find evidence of illegal surveillance or evidence tampering, then you'll have to prove it in court." "And Agent Chun, I've gotten very good at courtroom presentations lately." After hanging up, Tom sat back in his chair and considered his options. The FBI investigation was probably inevitable. Vincent's methods weren't always strictly legal, and eventually someone would notice. But Tom had learned something important over the past few months. When you burn bridges, make sure you burn them completely. Half measures led to half victories, and half victories left your enemies alive to fight another day. He picked up his phone and dialed Vincent's number. "We need to talk," Tom said when Vincent answered. "Federal heat? Warming up. I'll be there in an hour." As Tom waited for Vincent to arrive, he walked through his house, really looked at it for the first time in months. He'd built this place with his own hands, every room designed with love and hope for the future. Linda's absence had improved it. Kyle's presence made it home. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, covering the town in pristine white. By morning, everything would look clean and new, as if the past had been erased. Tom smiled and began planning his next construction project. Some foundations were worth protecting at any cost. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.